In 1930, with 1 in 4 Americans out of work and the country in economic freefall, one man decided to raise 228 buildings in the middle of Midtown Manhattan and replace them with something the world had never seen. Not a single skyscraper. A complex of 14 towers built simultaneously, with a private street running through the middle, an underground city beneath the sidewalk, and a concert hall that seated nearly 6,000 people. The budget was $100 million. The site was already bleeding money at a rate of $7.61 per minute before a shovel touched the ground. And the architectural firm that was supposed to anchor the whole thing, the Metropolitan Opera, had already walked away. And what John D. Rockefeller Jr. built in that 9-year window was the largest private construction undertaking in American history. I dug into the records and used AI to show you what this actually looked like. This is how Rockefeller Center was actually built. If this is the kind of video you like, please subscribe and hit the like button. The land itself was the first disaster. Rockefeller had signed a lease in October 1928 on a 22-acre block between 48th and 51st Streets, stretching from 5th Avenue to 6th Avenue. The original plan was a new home for the Metropolitan Opera Company. Then the stock market crashed in October 1929. The Met pulled out. Rockefeller was left holding a lease on 22 acres of Midtown real estate that was costing him a fortune in rent and taxes every single day, with no anchor tenant and no plan. What he had on that land was chaos. 228 buildings stood on the site, including tenements, brownstones, speakeasies, and small businesses. Every single one had to come down. Every tenant had to be relocated. Demolition began in 1930, and the last holdouts weren't cleared until August 1931, some of them refusing to leave until the buildings around them were already coming apart. Several tenants on the western and southeastern edges of the site refused to move at all, and Rockefeller Center was built around them. The clearing operation generated 1.25 million tons of debris, all of it hauled out through the streets of Manhattan. What replaced the cleared land wasn't empty ground. It was a construction zone of a scale that had never existed in a single private development in New York City. Rockefeller didn't have the luxury of building one structure at a time. The economics only worked if the whole complex started generating rental income as fast as possible. That meant every building had to go up at once, across the full 22 acres simultaneously. He found his anchor tenants in radio. The Radio Corporation of America, RCA, which owned both NBC and RKO, needed consolidated space for all its operations. Deals struck with RCA, NBC, and RKO guaranteed $3 million per year in rental income, barely enough to justify breaking ground, but enough. The complex was designed around their needs, and the section along 6th Avenue became known as Radio City. Rockefeller hired not one architectural firm, but 3, forced into collaboration under the single banner of the Associated Architects. The group included Reinhardt and Hofmeister, Corbett, Harrison and McMurray, and Hood, Godley, and Fouillou, led in practice by Raymond Hood, the most prominent commercial architect in New York at the time. Hood had already built the Daily News Building and the McGraw-Hill Building in Manhattan, both landmarks of early modernism. But Rockefeller Center was a fundamentally different problem. This was not one building. It was a coordinated system of buildings that had to function as a single organism, with shared foundations, a unified underground concourse, and a consistent Art Deco architectural language applied across millions of square feet designed by competing firms with competing instincts. What made the design genuinely revolutionary was its relationship with the street and the ground below it. The architects designed a private interior street, Rockefeller Plaza, running north to south through the center of the complex, creating a pedestrian spine that no other development in Manhattan had. Below street level, a continuous underground concourse connected every building in the complex to each other and to the subway system, creating what Hood and his team described as a city within a city, a self-contained urban environment operating on multiple levels simultaneously. The sunken plaza at the base of the central tower was initially conceived as a commercial space for storefronts. It didn't perform as a retail corridor. In 1936, it was converted into the ice skating rink that has defined the space ever since. What looks in hindsight like a planned centerpiece was, in its original form, a commercial experiment that failed and was transformed into something far more durable. I keep returning to the raw numbers of this project because I think they're the only way to actually feel what it was. This wasn't a building site. It was closer to a small industrial city that had been dropped into the middle of Manhattan and told to operate at full capacity from day one. At the peak of construction, between 40,000 and 60,000 workers were employed across the complex. They excavated 1.25 million tons of debris. They poured 88,000 tons of cement. They laid 39 million bricks. They did all of this during the worst economic crisis in American history, and for many of these men, the Rockefeller site was the only steady work in the city. Ironworkers earned approximately $15 per day at a time when factory wages, for those lucky enough to have factory jobs, had collapsed to around $2 per day. The men willing to walk steel beams hundreds of feet above Midtown Manhattan commanded a premium. Many of them were immigrants: Irish, Italian, Scandinavian, Eastern European, and Mohawk ironworkers from the Kanawaki Reserve near Montreal, who had been building bridges and skyscrapers across the northeastern United States for decades. They were known for their technical skill and their steadiness at height, attributes that were not metaphorical on a project where the steel was being set at over 850 feet above the street. The image that captured all of this was taken on September 20th, 1932. 11 ironworkers sitting on a steel beam at the 69th floor of the RCA building, 850 feet above Midtown Manhattan, eating lunch. No harnesses, no nets, Central Park visible in the background. The photograph, originally published in the New York Herald Tribune under the title "Builders of the City Enjoy Luncheon," was staged as a publicity stunt for the building. But the men in it were real ironworkers, and the danger was completely real. The staging enhanced an actual practice rather than inventing one. Ironworkers ate lunch at height because that was where they were. Excavation of the site began in April 1931. Construction on the first buildings started that September. The RKO building became the first structure in the complex to be completed in September 1932. Radio City Music Hall followed in December 1932. The flagship RCA building, 30 Rockefeller Plaza, rose to 850 feet across 66 floors and was completed in 1933, becoming the visual anchor of the entire complex. Radio City Music Hall was the most technically ambitious single building on the site, and it opened before the centerpiece tower was even finished. The theater was designed by Edward Durell Stone for the exterior and interior designer Donald Desky, brought in by impresario Samuel "Roxy" Rothafel, who had already built a reputation as one of the country's great theatrical operators through his work at the Roxy Theater on Times Square. Rockefeller gave him the resources to build something that had no precedent. Construction started in September 1931. When the hall opened on December 27, 1932, it seated 5,960 people, making it the largest indoor theater in the world, a record it still holds today. The auditorium ran 160 feet in length under an 84-foot ceiling, with walls sweeping upward in great Art Deco arches echoing the motif of a setting sun. The 60-foot-high foyer was finished with custom carpets, massive chandeliers, and murals commissioned specifically for the space. Desky used materials including aluminum, chrome, and glass that had never been applied at this scale in a theater interior. On opening night, 100,000 people requested admission. 6,200 got in. Rothafel introduced the dance troupe he had brought from his Roxy Theater, calling them the Roxyettes. In 1934, they were renamed the Radio City Rockettes. The stage itself was an engineering achievement in its own right, a hydraulic lift system capable of raising and lowering entire sections of the floor, allowing set changes of a scale no other theater in the world could manage. What strikes me about Radio City Music Hall is the timing. The country was at its lowest point. A quarter of the workforce had no job. And into that environment, Rockefeller and Rothafel put a 6,000-seat palace of entertainment, deliberately priced so ordinary people could afford a ticket. The economics were one calculation. The psychology was another entirely. Not everything at Rockefeller Center went according to plan. Some of it went spectacularly, publicly wrong. In 1932, Nelson Rockefeller, John D. Rockefeller Jr.'s son, and a director of the center, commissioned the Mexican muralist Diego Rivera to paint a large fresco for the lobby of the RCA building. The agreed theme was Man at the Crossroads, looking with hope and high vision to the choosing of a new and better future. Rivera submitted a sketch. It was approved. Work began in March 1933. On April 24, 1933, a headline appeared in the New York World Telegram. Rivera perpetuates scenes of communist activity for RCA walls and Rockefeller Jr. foots bill. Days after the article ran, Rivera added a portrait of Vladimir Lenin to the mural's composition. Nelson Rockefeller wrote to Rivera personally, requesting the removal of Lenin's likeness. Rivera refused, offering instead to add a portrait of Abraham Lincoln on the opposing side for political balance. Rockefeller rejected the compromise. On May 9, 1933, workers were ordered to stop Rivera's access to the building. He was paid in full and dismissed. The mural was covered. In February 1934, Rockefeller Center workers peeled it directly from the wall and destroyed it. Only black and white photographs survive, taken by Rivera's assistant Lucien Bloch, who suspected what was coming and documented the work before the plaster came down. Rivera recreated the composition from those photographs in Mexico City at the Palacio de Bellas Artes, retitling it Man, Controller of the Universe. The original version, painted directly onto the wall of the most prominent building in the most ambitious construction project in the country, is gone. The lobby was eventually given a replacement mural by the Catalan artist Josep Maria Sert. It is still there today. In December 1931, as demolition and early foundation work was underway on the site, construction workers pooled their wages and bought a 20-foot balsam fir. They decorated it themselves with tin cans, paper garlands, and strings of cranberries, and stood it at the edge of the excavation pit. The men lined up at the tree to receive their paychecks. Many of these workers were reporting to a Depression winter construction site on the strength of being among the fortunate ones who had found work at all. Rockefeller's management recognized something in what the workers had done. By 1933, the tradition was formalized and made an official annual event. The trees grew steadily larger with each passing decade. By 1966, the displays had reached near 6 stories in height and required dedicated rigging crews to install. The public lighting ceremony, held around the sunken plaza after its 1936 conversion into the ice skating rink, drew thousands of spectators. The tradition that construction workers started with their own money in 1931 became one of the most recognized annual events in the country. It was broadcast nationally. It still is. By fall 1939, the original 14-building complex was complete. In November 1939, John D. Rockefeller Jr. drove the ceremonial final rivet into the steel frame of the last building himself. The total cost of the original complex was approximately $100 million, equivalent to roughly $1.8 billion in today's money. The project had been financed entirely with private capital, with no government subsidy during the worst decade in American economic history. The numbers at completion were staggering. The complex contained over 5 million square feet of leasable office space. By fall 1939, it housed 26,000 tenants and received more than 125,000 visitors daily. That year alone, 1.3 million people went on a guided tour or visited the RCA building's observation deck. 6 million visited the underground shopping concourse. 7 million attended a performance somewhere in the complex. The workforce that built it had spent 9 years on the job. They had done it in rotating shifts, through the Depression, through bitter Manhattan winters, through the years when the men on that site were the ones being photographed eating lunch 850 feet above the street because it was the most visible evidence available that somebody, somewhere, was still building something. The thing that gets me every time I work through this project is the decision point in 1929. The Metropolitan Opera walks away. Rockefeller is sitting on a hemorrhaging site in the middle of the Depression. The rational move was to find a way out. He didn't find a way out. He decided to build something larger than anything a single private developer had ever attempted in the United States. That choice is why Midtown Manhattan looks the way it looks. What got built between 1930 and 1939 on those 22 acres in Midtown Manhattan cannot be measured in square footage or rental income. It was proof at full operational scale and in the worst possible economic conditions, that a private developer could build an entire urban district from scratch, finance it without public money, make it function as a self-contained system, and fill it with people. Between 40,000 and 60,000 workers showed up every day to the only major construction site operating at full capacity in a city where a quarter of the population couldn't find work. They poured 88,000 tons of cement. They laid 39 million bricks. They built 14 towers simultaneously and an underground city beneath all of them. The underground concourse that connected every building to the subway system became the template for urban mixed-use development that planners and developers have been copying for 8 decades. The sunken plaza that failed as a retail space and succeeded as an ice skating rink became one of the most imitated public spaces in the world. The Art Deco design language applied uniformly across all 14 buildings set the visual standard for commercial architecture through the middle decades of the 20th century. And then there were the workers, the ironworkers sitting on a beam 850 feet over Manhattan with their lunch pails. The Mohawk steelworkers who walked the high iron without nets. The men who pooled their Depression wages to buy a 20-foot balsam fir and stand it at the edge of a pit in 1931. They built the largest private construction project in American history in the worst decade of the century, with no guarantee that the tenants would come. The tenants came. In November 1939, John D. Rockefeller Jr. drove the last rivet into the last building of a complex that 9 years earlier had been 228 tenements, a failed opera deal, and a liability. What he tore down was replaced by something that still draws 125,000 people a day. The complex has been rebuilt, expanded, bought and sold, renamed and landmarked. But the bones of that 9-year sprint are still there. The RCA building, the sunken plaza, the underground concourse, the private street, the Christmas tree. One man, holding that lease in the middle of the Great Depression, chose to build something that had never existed. And the skyline changed. If that caught your attention, hit subscribe and give this video a like. And let me know in the comments, what construction project, city, or industrial era do you want me to cover next? See you in the next video.